So welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. In this video we're going to discuss Syria's civil war, the global push for stability, and you have the Muslim Arab world and the Muslim world coming together trying to push forward to see what they need to do, what are the requirements to push stability into Syria now that Bashar al-Assad, the dictator, is gone. And some of the comments, and I'm seeing this all over social media, that the issue here is dictatorship. Dictatorship is the issue, and that these countries like Syria, they need to push forward, they need to go towards democracy, because democracy, if you have democracy, folks, you don't have dictatorship. Right? And you see the comments here from Suraj Parus. He says, these countries must become democratic, not dictatorship. And I find that quite bizarre and hypocritical, because does democracy actually protect you or protect society from dictatorship rule? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. How do we know this? Well, just look at what happened in Egypt with Mohamed Morsi. Mohamed Morsi was democratically elected by the people. Democratically elected. What happened? We had a government within a government. It's called a parallel government, where the military had power behind the scenes. And so what they did was they dictated their way in forcefully removing Mohamed Morsi from power, who was, by the way, democratically elected. And guess what? The international community did not say a word, because they had an agenda against Islam and Muslims. They were happy that he was forcefully removed. He wasn't removed by a political ballot, a vote. No, he was removed forcefully. So you can be a democracy, you could be fairly voted in by the people, but it doesn't mean that you don't have dictatorship, and that dictatorship will come in and remove you. And who are the dictatorships pulling the strings in the background? It is the so-called Westerners. It is the so-called the guys who are working like Mossad or the CIA agents who are working behind the scenes, pulling the strings, like in Israel, where they dictate which leader they want you to be ruled by. And they're doing exactly the same thing in Gaza. In Gaza, they are doing exactly the same thing. I mean, you ask any Jew, they will say Hamas was elected by the people. And so when they're bombing Gaza, you know what they're doing? They're bombing Gaza, and they're saying that they are all guilty because they voted in Hamas. And so what the West is doing is playing the dictatorship role. They are forcefully now removing Hamas so they can put in a puppet who is a Zionist puppet, who is sympathetic to the West and who would want to be governed by the West. So when you accept democracy, what you are accepting in reality is to be controlled by the West, because they are the dictators. Whatever they say goes. And we have seen the very same thing in Turkey with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was democratically elected. In 2016, he was almost forcefully thrown by those who were working behind the scenes. And the West was praising for this to happen. Praising this to happen. So despite Erdogan being democratically elected, they were still calling him what? A dictator. Look. So President Erdogan, who is running his country on democracy, on liberal democracy, he was still identified as a dictator despite running that country under democracy. The irony. So you say that the country has to be run by democracy, but if he runs it and continuously gets elected to position, you then identify him as a dictator. How does that work? So, being a democracy does not mean that you are not equal to a dictator. You can still be a democracy and still be a dictator. Alhamdulillah, what these Muslims need, these Muslim countries need, not a democracy. Because when you become democracy, as the way Westernized understand, is that you need to enter the Western Council and you need to be the bootlicker for the Westerners. And so what happens is you are now being controlled by the West. No, we can have an independent Khilafah, for instance, where he rules and he rules by the book of Allah. This is what's going to give people justice. Because when you rule by the book of Allah, you're fearing God. You're implementing the true justice for the people. And so when you fear God, you fear oppressing the people. This is what the Muslims need. Now you may say, well, if we elect this sort of government, then you're going to have this, they say, theocracy, where you lead like a monarchy, where you lead it through the bloodline. But in Islam, we don't believe this, that it is only through the bloodline. It can extend beyond family members, but it must be among religious people, people who fear God and they know their religion. So if you have a look at the Khilafas, they were the scholars of Islam. These are the people that we require to be elected in government. And when that happens, they're going to be successful. So folks, don't ever believe in this idea that when you're democratic, you represent the people, and it's whatever the people say is what you represent. This is a big lie. We know that a lot of the democratic parties, they will make all these false promises, and then when they get into government, they then betray the people. And of course, they would say, oh, but we can replace the leader, and if he betrays the trust, we can then replace him. And so what happens is, then they replace him, and he makes fake promises too. He comes into government, and then they replace him as well. And then he makes fake promises, they replace him as well. So it's like a never-ending cycle. And this is why it is commonly known that even amongst the Westerners, they say there are two things we don't trust. One is lawyers, the second is politicians. So they have lost their trust in their politicians. Because you know why? A lot of these politicians, what happens is when they get democratically elected, if they serve the people's interest, then what happens is the money gets dispersed evenly, equally. There's some sort of fair dinkum, a fair play. However, this isn't in the national interest because they need to serve Israel. All the money needs to be funneled to Israel. So when they don't funnel the money to Israel, what happens is they try and assassinate him. That's what I think happened to Donald Trump, right? When he wasn't serving Israel, they tried to assassinate him. Because Israel wanted to go to war. Israel wanted to expand its borders. Donald Trump was coming with the sentiment that he wanted to end the war. He wanted to put peace in the Middle East. So that's why they tried to assassinate him. There is no such thing as democracy, I'll tell you right now. Remember when the COVID pandemic happened? The government was forcing people to get injected. forcing vaccination on people, forcing them to vaccinate. If they weren't vaccinating, then they would terminate them with their jobs. They'd say, we're going to sack you if you don't vaccinate. So these people want to talk about, democracy, the West. We don't have dictatorship. You are dictators. Come on, man. You are 110% dictators. And we know this. It's evidence. You can't even hide it anymore. For example, I can give you another example. I've got 100 examples in my head, but here's another example. Nuclear warheads. Who can have a nuclear warhead? All the democratic countries vote amongst themselves. Well, they don't really vote, but they come in, all the allies, the Britain, America, France, Australia, they come together and they say, who can have a nuclear warhead? Israel can have limited nuclear warheads. America can have limited nuclear warheads. Pakistan can't have nuclear warheads. And if they do, and they tried to imprison the guy, they did imprison the guy that actually created the nuclear warhead for Pakistan. But if Iran tries to develop nuclear warheads, no, they're not allowed to have nuclear warheads. So how dare you, how shamelessly, aren't you ashamed of yourself? Aren't you ashamed of yourself to claim you aren't a dictator? When you are literally being the dictator here. You are literally saying, who can have a nuclear warhead? Who can't have a nuclear warhead? So how are you saying that you as a government are exempted from being a dictator? You are the pinnacle of being a dictator. And what happens is, it doesn't end there. More examples. I'll show you how, look how the way global dictatorship works. Turkey, President Recep Erdogan, he invested in S-400s from Russia. America said, no, you can't take these S-400 defense missiles. You can't take this, you can't buy this from Russia. If you buy these from Russia, then we're not going to sell you our, their latest fighter jet. I'm not sure what it's called. F-50 or something like this, or whatever it's called. If you go ahead and buy the S-400 from Russia, we are not going to sell you our fighter jet. Look at the dictatorship. Look at this is control. This is dictatorship. And so Turkey said, stuff you, and they went ahead and brought the S-400 defense mechanism, anti-aircraft missile defense mechanism. And then what did America did? They said, okay, we're going to send sanctions. They tried to force Turkey into an economic crisis. So this isn't dictatorship. When a foreign country does not accept Western ideals such as LGBTIQ, or doesn't accept their moral values, what happens? The dictators of the West, they come and they bomb it, like they did in Afghanistan. They replaced it for puppet governments. Isn't this dictatorship? Look at, for example, Israel. Apparently the only democracy in the Middle East. We saw all the massacring. We saw all the indiscriminate massacring, targeting innocent civilians, specifically shooting at ambulances, at humanitarian camps, specifically targeting and killing. And the United Nations has sanctioned, has sent threats to Israel, has documented and said, yes, there is definitely a case of war crimes. And Amnesty International, they've also documented this. And Israel, claiming to be the only democracy in the Middle East, massacring over 20,000 children. Their defense minister said, when they were going into Gaza, cut the water, cut the electricity, cut the food. Is this the democracy? When babies had to die in incubators because it didn't have power? This is the only democracy in the Middle East. They are not a democracy. And even if they are a democracy, they are no different than a dictatorship. And these same dictators say to the Palestinian people that we are going to control your borders. You can live separately from us, but we are going to control your borders. We are going to dictate what food comes into your country. We are going to dictate what military capability you have. We're going to dictate whether you have an airport or not. We're going to dictate whether you have tanks or not. We are going to dictate whether you have your own warship. We are going to dictate whether you have your own airport. And they don't have none of that. They're all under the dictatorship of Israel. Apparently the only democracy in the Middle East. They're going to control the gas lines that come into your country. If they shut off the gas and the power, they shut it off. They can starve the people. This is the democracy. This is the democracy. This is dictatorship to the core.